In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your front brakes. Let's get started. Let's remove the wheel, take off this cap if you have one, use a pry bar or a screwdriver, just be gentle not to damage it or the wheel. Set it aside and then use your 22mm socket and remove all 8 of your lug nuts. Remove the wheel. Next, I want to remove these two 17mm bolts that hold the caliper onto the bracket. Leave this one in a little bit so that it holds the caliper while you take off the top one. Okay, take both of them out, and if you need to, you can use a pry bar and pry the caliper off of here. There we go. Set it aside right on top. That way it doesn't push on the brake hose. And looks like this had some of these shims here. And I suspect that's why it was difficult to remove, because these were holding on tight to the pad. Now you can remove your pads. The anti-rattle clips came off when I took the pads out. Now use a 21mm socket and remove these two large bolts that hold the bracket onto the knuckle. Leave this on in a couple threads so it holds it while you remove the top. Take this out. Last thing we have to do is remove the rotor, which, as you can see, is stuck on here. So what I'm going to do is take a hammer it from the back side, and that should break it free. Typically I'd put a lug nut on for safety, but these lug studs are so long that can't really go anywhere. There we go. Try to clean this up as much as possible. The next step would be to clean the hub, and sometimes you have to sand it down just a little bit, slightly, or use a wire brush to remove any of the surface rust or even rot if it got that bad. But mine is actually in very good condition. All I have to do is remove the old grease that someone put on here and reapply either new grease or anti-seize. I prefer anti-seize, but either way, we'll just coat it to prevent rust. But in my case, I don't actually have to sand anything. I just have to clean off the old grease, like I said, and then we'll be good to go. So just go around, and what really matters is this outer lip here, as well as the inner lip. This center part, it's fine if it's not clean. Just remove debris, obviously, because you don't want the rotor to sit at an angle because it's sitting on something here. You don't want any raised areas. But other than that, just make sure the inner and the outer lip are clean. Once that's done, like I said, we can move on. All right, so now I'm going to take some brake parts cleaner and just degrease it. Hit it with the wire brush really quick, just to make sure that all the debris is coming off. Now I'm going to take a brush with some anti-seize on it and just coat the surface of this hub, focusing mainly on this inner ring here and the outer one. And that's because this is where the rotor is going to contact. The rest of it doesn't really matter. If you want to coat it, go ahead. But whatever you do, make sure you don't put a thick layer all around. A nice thin layer will do the job, because if it is thick, it will actually fling out as the rotor spins or as the hub spins really fast. And you don't want this to get onto your brake rotors. So like I said, a nice thin layer, mainly on the outside and on the inside, and then we'll move along. Now I'm going to put my rotor on. And I like to give these a quick cleaning with a rag and some brake parts cleaner. As you can see, the surface is pretty dirty. Get all this debris off of here, all the oils that might be on it from the factory. And do this to the back side as well. And now let's clean up the caliper and the bracket so we can get the rest of the brakes on. Now I have my caliper bracket on my workbench here. Both sliders move in and out freely, so that's good. We don't have to unseize any of them. So having said that, I'm going to take a wire brush, clean up this area here where the pads ride. You don't want any buildup of rust or any other debris here, because then they won't slide in and out smoothly. Then you'll get uneven brake wear, or the brakes will even get locked up. Now, I was able to clean mine up very well with just a wire brush. If you have a lot of rot buildup, you might need to sand it down, in which case do whatever you need to do to get it flat. But mine is clean. All you see here is surface rust, which we will coat with some brake grease. But before that, let's do the other side as well. Grab your brake grease, put a thin layer on here. That way it'll prevent rust from building up. But you don't want too much, because then it'll squeeze out onto the rotors as the brakes heat up. And of course, do the same to the other side. Next, what I want to do is take care of the slider pins. So I'm going to pop these out, remove the boot. The boot might want to come off with them. I'm going to try and leave it on here though. There we go. These are actually nice and clean, still have plenty of grease on them. So all I'm going to do is just wipe off the old grease and reapply new grease. These are basically brand new looking, which is great. Sometimes they will be either seized in there or pitted or rusted, or they'll have very old gunky grease on them, in which case you'd want to get all that off, clean them nice and shiny like this, and then reinstall. I'm also going to put a little bit of grease in the boot here. This will act kind of as a reserve of grease. So once the slider pin goes in, the grease that I put in there will work its way onto everything. And now I'm just going to pull it back out for a second. I'm going to put a little bit of grease up at the top here, right where the boot slides onto the slider pin, because if there's grease there, it'll actually seal up a lot better than if there is not. And one last area that you need to grease is right here where the boot seals up against the bracket. The grease will actually ensure a proper seal. And there we go. And now do the same to the other slider, and then we can install the bracket onto the truck. Take your bracket, slide it on, line up the two bolts. That top one, I'm going to have to move the caliper for it, so I'll just start the bottom one. Let's bottom these out, and then we'll torque them. 166 foot-pounds is the torque for these two bolts. And when it comes time to putting on the anti-rattle clips for the pads, you want to put it so that this pin here lines up with the flat part of the tab. You can see the other side has a little bevel to it, has a curve. You want it to line up with the flat part. If you put it on backwards, you'll see that one part has a longer arm to it, the other one is short, and it'll be not lined up properly. And so when you go to put it onto the bracket, it's going to push in the wrong direction. So what these do is they actually help the pads spread away from the rotor when you're not using them, when you're not applying the brakes. So that's why you want these clips lining up correctly, just like this. Perfect. Let's do the outer pad. All right, just make sure they stay in here. They have the tendency to want to fall out. Before installation, inspect your caliper to make sure that it's clean in here, it's not rotted, it's not leaking. And once you've done that, we want to go ahead and compress the two pistons, push them back so that the new pads that are thicker have the space to actually get in here. So use your brake pad or brake caliper compression tool and push these two pistons back. Now take your caliper, slide it right over the pads. Let's put the two bracket bolts back in. Start them on by hand, snug them up, and then torque these to 56 foot-pounds. All right, let's get the wheel back on. Put on all 8 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and then we'll torque these in a cross pattern to 165 foot-pounds. And don't forget about this cap.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.